Cool. Sweet. Well, thanks for both of you guys for joining us. We're super excited to talk about the project. I think we'll mainly probably focus on just talking about the project that you guys worked together on, the Los Seis de Boulder project, because that's super inspiring. But just off the bat, if you guys want to both introduce yourselves, your pronouns, and just anything about your background, your artistic journey, themes you like to work with, just anything.
Awesome. And I was going to ask, just for my information, can I know who both of you are? Because I haven't met you before.
Yes, yeah. So my name is Cree. I use she, her pronouns. And me and Inez are just both the interns for this term with Streetwise. Yeah, I'm currently doing a grad program in art leadership and cultural management, but super interested in public art and community engagement in that realm. So yeah. And then Inez.
Yeah, I'm Inez. You guys were in communication with me through email. Thank you so much for that and for having the time to join us today. And I am an artist myself. I focus mostly on oil painting, but I've also done some murals. So I got into Streetwise basically by that, just being active and looking into their murals and stuff. And then I'm also one of the interns. So yeah.
Cool. Nice to meet you both. Thank you for that. That helps me just know where I am and who I'm talking to. Celina, do you want to start so I can get my brain together?
So my name is Celina Jara Tovar. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I identify as like an artist / advocate activist. So I am very much interested in like art activism and community engagement as well. And using art as a tool of like healing and expression. So I graduated from CU Boulder in May 2019, and I'm currently in the process of grad school applications. So
yeah, some lucky grad school is gonna snap you up. So yeah, my name is Jasmine Baetz. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am an artist and educator and sometimes other words, but I think especially as it pertains to like this project, the sculpture project for Los Seis de Boulder, and then the work we did for Streetwise for that exhibition is just, yeah, kind of like complicating the boundaries of like what an artist is and what they do and the, I don't know, what I found productive, and I mean, this doesn't necessarily totally apply to like the gallery show, but certainly in terms of like public art and like the campus that is CU Boulder and like the rigidity of that space, sometimes being an artist or being identified as an artist means you can start some shit that might be harder to start from other more rigid positions. So anyway, that's my intro.
That's awesome. And are you currently a teacher at another university? Is that what I read?
Yeah. So I'm an assistant professor of art at Coker University in Hartsville, South Carolina, where I relocated to last summer after graduating from CU Boulder in May 2020. So I was a year behind Celina.
Nice. That's awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, let's talk about this Los Seis de Boulder project. Super awesome cross section of activism and art, which is obviously super important. Would you guys just share with us and with the viewers a little bit about, the actual instance that you were memorializing? Who are Los Seis? How are they involved in Chicanx and Latinx activism, and just kind of what their story was and what exactly happened? Because I went to see you as well many years ago, but feel like this isn't something that's really super outwardly talked about, which is the whole reason that you guys were like, let's do this.
Yeah, I can start. So Los Seis de Boulder are 6 Chicano activists and students. So not all of them were students at CU Boulder, but they were killed by 2 bombs in May of 1974. This had happened after a very like turbulent or contestant, like a very tough year prior, semester prior, so that up to it, some of the CU Boulder students who were specifically involved with the UMAS office, which is United Mexican American Students, or the UMAS student org. They were, like, the university was withholding financial aid. They had by force kicked one of the program directors, and Jasmine, step in if like you can provide the exact program director. So that was Ricardo Falcon, and there was someone else who I'm forgetting.
Well, yeah, so Ricardo Falcon was removed from the campus in 1972, and the university tried to get the director of the UMAS program to remove him. So Pat Vigil, who was the director, refused to remove Ricardo, and so the university removed both Pat and Ricardo from the leadership of that program, which was like the beginning of the dismantling of the UMAS EOP program in the 70s. And I mean, so that's one of many things that the administration at CU Boulder did to work actively against the interests of the Mexican American Chicano students who were there for these programs that were built for them, right? So like the history is very sorry, Celina, I get
That's, thank you for filling in. So yeah, those programs that Jasmine was mentioning, those programs were designed to bring more students, more Chicanx identified, Mexican American identified students onto campus. One of the main goals of this program was to try to represent CU Boulder's campus to be representative of the state population, so percentage-wise as well. So all these things were leading up, right? And so then that summer, there was a takeover of the temporary building number 1. And that takeover was due to like protest of the person who had filled the position of Ricardo Falcon. And so what happened was May 27 of 1974, the first bomb went off at the Chautauqua Park. And in that bomb, 3 of the Los Seis passed away. So that was Orna Jacula. It was, can you fill me in, Jasmine?
No, it was Yuna Jacula, Neva Romero, and Reyes Martinez, who were killed in that bomb. Yuna was a grad of CU Boulder. We think she double majored in psychology and sociology. Neva was an education undergraduate student. She was a junior. She was also in like student leadership. And Reyes Martinez was a graduate of CU Boulder Law. He was a lawyer. So those 3 were killed that day. And then, of course, like folks were in mourning, right? They had lost three like young leaders in the movement. And 2 days later, I mean, the day in between, right? So there's like hours and hours and hours of history, right? Of like these days, of these like really charged days that have been like, that I would say like Boulder has like sort of erased from its memory, right? But so in those 2 days, 2 days later, there was a second bombing, and Florencio Granado and Francisco Doherty and Heriberto Terran, they were all killed in a parking lot at 28th and Canyon, which is like another, right? Like Chautauqua, 28th and Canyon, these are places that we go and that we walk and that we inhabit as people, right? So I think when we like start to talk about the history and like how situated it is in the landscape of Boulder, that is like a pretty important factor. And then also in that second bombing, Antonio Alcantar was injured. He wasn't killed. So all 6 students who died were students or past students, or also like one in the case of Francisco Doherty was likely a prospective student who would have come to CU Boulder. So, right, like all these people are intimately tied to CU Boulder and to the historical Chicano student movement at CU Boulder. So that's what the work is about. It's about honoring them and their struggle and the work they did, and they did a lot of work, right? And so like when we forget about their deaths, we also forget about their lives and the work that they did. So that's all part of it. Is there anything else, Celina, that
I think also like just adding on like the comment that Cree had mentioned was, you know, like you went to CU Boulder and you didn't hear about this. And so that I believe was, you know, on purpose. And so the only people who were still honoring the legacy and the lives lost and mourning the lives were people who were involved in the UMAS student organization and who continued to make sure that that was a history that wasn't completely forgotten. And even today, UMAS hosts a summer program called Akita on campus that aims to bring Latinx, Chicanx, Mexican American students onto campus, specifically those students who are pushed out of high school in general or not encouraged to attend higher education. So, and that's a big part of the curriculum is letting them know about the story of Los Seis, but also in connection with the Chicano movement in Boulder that was happening, or in Colorado, I mean, that was happening around the same time.
Were the kids who were in during that summer in the Akita Collective, they were involved with the actual creation of the project, right?
Yes. So some of them were involved on the actual creation of the project. Some of them were coming in after and like working on that Akita Collective piece that you all saw. And so they actually got to see it like once it was created and installed, and it was something that was amazing because the year prior, Jasmine and I had been talking about it. I taught the art activism module with them. And we were talking about it, and we had a lot of students who were like, yeah, I would come back. I would love to like work on it. So it was very exciting to see those students like tangibly engaging with the art piece.
Yeah,
I think was very important.
Is that how you two connected, both being involved with the Akita Collective as like facilitators? No.
We just met in the hallway. I'm just kidding. Well, I mean, I was a part of, you know, the undergrad class in the Department of Art and Art History. I had seen Jasmine. I definitely had seen Jasmine walking around. I remember meeting Jasmine when Jasmine walked into one of the UMAS meetings. So I was a part of the UMAS y Mecha student org. So UMAS is the United Mexican American Student Org. Mecha is the, I'm going to say it in Spanish, Movimiento Estudiantil de Chicanx de Aztlán, which means Chicanx student movement of Aztlán. And so those two orgs sort of a few years ago, or more than a few years ago, fused together because the same people were attending the same meetings. So Jasmine walked in one day with another friend of ours and was, you know, very interested in working and creating some sort of piece because Jasmine had just seen the film. What was the film called again? The
Symbols of Resistance.
Symbols of Resistance. Yeah. So you can, I don't know if you want to talk about like what sort of drew you to seeking out that community.
Yeah. So I came to CU Boulder in fall 2017, and that was months after Charlottesville, and I was thinking a lot about monuments and spaces, and I was thinking about CU Boulder and the way that the campus felt, and I was not feeling good on the campus. And so like it's, you know, a little bit too tidy of a story, but like when I learned about Los Seis de Boulder, I was like, oh, like that is of however many suppressed histories, like there is something that is informing this landscape and this place and how it looks and how it feels for people like traversing it day after day, right? So so when I saw that film, I thought, well, like I would like to like I thought, like, this is fucked, like this is insane. Like I had, like, you know, I think a lot of people who don't learn about this history like through Umasi Mecha, who don't kind of get like brought into it in that like really intentional way, or just like I don't know. I've introduced this history to so many students, to so many undergrads in particular at CU Boulder, like in my ceramics for non-majors class, right? They didn't show up for that, but that's what they got. And like they get angry. They get angry. And so I think I also had this like anger response to not like to being in a place that was dishonest to the point where something like this would be suppressed. Yeah. But I was also incredibly mindful that like while I am a mixed race woman of color, like I'm not of this community, and even if I am having reactivity towards like the white hegemonic space that is CU Boulder, that does not mean that this is like something for me to touch or go near. So I went to Umasi Mecha to say I would like to do something, but I would like to do it with you, or like support you, or like how is this, like how can we do this, right? I don't know, it was probably pretty unsatisfying, like having me roll up and be like, but Celina and Lupe and a few other people from that first meeting wanted to work at that. A lot of people did. It wasn't just Celina and Lupe, but y'all were like the ones who became the people who were like there every weekend, right? Like doing the planning work and the making work and the facilitation work. So yeah, that's how all of that started.
Very cool. So the original, you know, at some point, if you want to just pull up the image of the mosaic of the project. So Jasmine, was it your initial, like in terms of just the creative visual part, were you like, this is what I want to do, like portraits, and like, let's all now kind of build around that and, you know, hustle as a community together to make that happen?
That's a good question. I mean, I would be curious to know Celina's recounting of it, but the portraits actually came as like the definitive framework in January 2019. So we were like well into the project. And I was lucky to have a meeting with Judy Baca in Los Angeles. And she like looked at like my hot mess sketches, and she's like, you can't do any of this. You need to like do some beautiful portraits. You need to just like figure out how to do faces. I mean, that's when the portraits came. Celina, what do you remember?
Yeah, I definitely do remember that, like speaking to you after you had gotten back from that meeting with Judy Baca. I think at first we were just like wanting to honor their stories. And so at least for me and the work that I do, I definitely love portraiture. And I think that portraiture holds a very big importance to tell stories, to tell narratives. But we were also trying to make it in a way that would bring in the community in general. So obviously it's a memorial sculpture for the lives that were lost, but I think like Jasmine had mentioned, like if we forget their deaths, we forget all the amazing things that they accomplished, so all their accomplishments. And so I think that was something that we were sort of considering, right? Or it's like, how do we honor them and the fact that they lost their lives without a say to it, but also honor the fact that all the work that they had accomplished is, you know, connected to having myself, like as a Chicana student, as a Chicana woman, be able to walk that campus and to get an education. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's helpful to hear you say that, Celina, because I remember us coming up with these sketches. They weren't even really sketches. They were just like big pieces of paper
Yeah.
where we had their names and we had like every little bit of information we knew about them, which isn't that much, right? Like at that point, I think, we had made contact with like some family members and were trying to like fill in gaps, but a lot of like even their biographical details, I don't know, we were like piecing it together, right? And so I think for a while we had the idea of a portrait that would be this real sort of like composite image of like a bunch of different identifiers, and like signifiers. And I think the helpful thing, like being reminded like, oh, you need to make some beautiful portraits, was like we need to like make them and make them larger than life and like luminous. And yes, all of those other things can be happening, but maybe they should be happening in the background, right? So for each of the portraits, we have like a one symbol or a couple of symbols that like we felt like encapsulates them, that we made like sort of a repeated tile form for. So it kind of like, it literally, I don't know, Celina, what it was like for you, but it felt like on the big community days, like 3 days before, we'd be like, okay, we have to really quickly like do some stuff, so some stuff is ready so that we can like think together and make together on Saturday. So it was like very fast and immediate, most of the time. And if someone had an idea about something, like I remember behind Florencio Granado, I was like, oh, we should have microphones, because he was like there at the mic. And like Juan Espinosa was like, no, you should have bull horns, because he's there with the bullhorn. Like, who has a microphone? Anyway, so I think a lot of creative decisions happened in that way, right? So
Yeah. And also to like touch on that too, like a lot of the creative decisions were feedback and comments that we had gotten from the families of Los Seis and people who knew them, people who were students, activists at the same time, who had gone to school with them. And so that was very important. And I know that Jasmine made it like a big importance to try to connect with them, to the families, not just in the sense of like, hey, we want to make an art project about like, your family members' lives and stuff, but engaging with them, having them come back to campus. Some of these families hadn't come back to campus since the deaths of Los Seis, hadn't been invited. They were frustrated too with the fact that the university had never acknowledged the deaths of Los Seis. So that I think was very, very much a big part of the creative decision. And like Jasmine mentioned, it was like 2 or 3 days before we knew we had a community like making day, and we were just like, yeah, let's do this. Or, hey, I thought about like making mosaic out of ceramic tiles. Can we make a bunch of tiles? So yeah.
Wow, yeah, that must have been so like monumental and heavy, but also inspiring to be basically trusted with this project, with these stories, especially, connecting with the loved ones of these deceased and stuff. When it's a story that's been kind of brushed under the rug for so long. So to hear people want to come forward and actually memorialize in that way must have been really meaningful work. There's also, we were reading a second installation, correct? That will be going up. Will it be this year probably?
Yeah, actually, Celina, I have some news. So the sculpture, so in 2020, we started working on a second sculpture project. That's something we'd been thinking about, like even as we were installing the first one and planning the first one, like how do we mark these sites, right? Like we were saying, like Chautauqua, 28th and Canyon. And so there was interest from Chautauqua in creating a marker. And so that's something that like a group of people worked with them on doing. I was a little bit involved with that, but it wasn't like part of the sculpture project. We didn't make anything for it, but it was part of the overall project of marking and claiming and having clarity, right? Like in the landscape around the traumas that have happened. And so for 28th and Canyon, we have been working with the city of Boulder, who accepted like a donation of a sculpture from the sculpture project. That's how we have like injected this piece into like the city of Boulder. They are receiving it as a donation from us. We've had, how do I put it delicately? We've had just like some slight delays with the planning office of the city of Boulder and some issues with the ease of like permitting public art specifically in Boulder. So like, you know, it's an issue at CU Boulder, it's an issue at the city of Boulder, both for like very different reasons. But the city, they're working with us to see this installation happen. The piece we started in January 2020. We were supposed to have a whole season of community making days, which we had to halt after 2 of them because of COVID. But we had enough tiles and enough stuff that a couple of us finished the piece. So it's been sitting in a loading dock in Denver for 10 months. And so the new Celina it has to move because Colorado Hardscapes is moving. So they need to move the sculpture. And BMocha, I mean, are you going to publish this? Or anyway, at some point you'll publish it and it'll already have happened, so it's fine. But BMocha, which is downtown Boulder, is going to host the sculpture for 1 year as an exhibition outside of the museum. While we get the permitting, like once the permitting has happened, it will move to its 28th and Canyon site. So I actually just had some phone calls today, Celina, and I was going to call you eventually, but now I'm telling you that's what's happening for 2021, 2022.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you were saying that the kind of different experiences working more directly with the city and the public art program, kind of in that realm, and then with the university. I didn't mean to skip over that. I would love to hear a little more about, like, was there like some semblance of pushback and it not being a permanent fixture, but many people wanted it to be a permanent fixture on the campus, correct?
Yeah, I can talk all day about this. Celina, do you want to say anything first?
Yeah. Yeah, so the way Jasmine was able to get around the fact that honestly the university didn't want the sculpture going up at all was to label it as like a temporary sculpture, temporary project, which we did. Once we set it up though, I think not only us, like, and the other like lead artists who worked on it, but the community itself was like, we don't want this going down. So it was about like a year, right, Jasmine, of like constantly having meetings get canceled, trying to work through loopholes, to the point where it finally was approved this past year. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in September, the sculpture was acquired by the university libraries, which was, yet another loophole. CU Boulder remains without a public art policy and acquisition. So, the reason why CU Boulder doesn't have a way that you can propose something to go on campus is so that they can control everything and not have any accountability to the people who make them up, like the students, staff, faculty who dwell in that place. Even if it is a corporate enterprise, like CU Boulder is still made up of the people, right?
Mhm.
So not having a policy, I don't know, I've sort of evolved in how I understand policies and policies not existing, right? Like a policy not being there, in my view, is generally so that there can be a lack of accountability around everything.
Yeah.
So CU Boulder has yet to rectify that. So I look forward to seeing them do that eventually. The chancellor has mandated that they need to have a public art committee who will make these decisions. So, fingers crossed for 2022. But in the meantime, the university libraries, acquired the sculpture, and with that acquisition, the sculpture is now the property of CU Boulder, and the libraries are the stewards of the sculpture. So that is its current status. it took a long, it took a lot of effort, and not necessarily effort on my part. It took such great collective effort to make that happen. It was astounding. It was astounding that the university did not claim this as like, there was so much time. There were so many junctures at which the university could have claimed this as like a, wow, like we didn't know this, like, we're all new. We all just got here. Like, thank you so much for this information. We want to now learn and grow and do right by our history, like our deeply violent racialized history, right? Like we want to be accountable to it. So, I mean, in my view, CU Boulder like must apologize for how it, as an institution, was not accountable to the students who were killed on its watch, right? And this is what the university seeks to avoid, I think. And so any concession, any sort of permanent status of the sculpture, that was sort of like the front that was being negotiated, I think. But the sculpture is now permanently there, and I'm thrilled. It's like, it's like a drop in the bucket, but it is a tangible thing that changes how one interprets the campus, which I think is what we wanted, right, Celina?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So it is permanently outside of temporary building 1, like where it went up. Cool.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a process.
Process.
Yeah. So let's pull up the image of the second. We have like the one little image of the second piece, just because I'd love to touch on. It's kind of a slightly different theme. I mean, obviously all encompassed, but less specific necessarily to the 6 direct lives that were lost, and kind of more of a theme or a reflection on like solidarity, I feel like, amongst, different POCs. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so this, and Celina, again, I want to hear like sort of how you remember it, but in my memory, in January 2020, Juan Espinoza like rolled up with a bunch of his photos of different protests in the 70s. And I mean, so UMass and MAP, which was the Migrant Action Program, like these groups were having their own interactions. That's a very neutral word, but interactions with the university, and like also like BSA and the group that was like the EOP for Indigenous students on campus. They were all like experiencing struggles in relation to the university and the university's sort of continued dismantling of the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as we would put it today. And so there was this image of this child with a little sign that said El Diario endorses the Black Student Alliance, Si Se Puede, and all of these photos, I think it was, I don't know if it was 72, 73, or 74, but one of those years these photos were from. And we just wanted to like honor that solidarity, right? These solidarities extend far back in history, right? And even on our campus, we can see how like Black students, brown students, Indigenous students, like POC students were advocating for one another and like involved in each other's struggles and work.
Yeah.
Celina?
Yeah. I remember exactly. That was January 2020, where the photographs were brought out, right? I think that day we had also focused on bringing in different or current like activists and students who were on who were doing amazing work on campus, right, for various different reasons. And so after that, I remember, Juan Espinoza brought out all the pictures, and we were just like amazed. We're like, wow. Because there's something documented. It's different like to hear about something and to hear a narrative, but to like visually see a narrative and visually see like tiny part of like history was just amazing. So this is in the second sculpture, right, Jasmine?
Yeah, so it's one of the panels of the second sculpture. And I'm just pulling up an image so I can refer to it. So this is one of the two panels. It's a three-sided sculpture. It's oriented a little bit differently from the campus sculpture. And so the other tiled panel is a fist, Black Power fist, Chicano Power fist. It's a power fist. And on the third side, I have the inscription so I could read it. So it harkens to this, you know, to these solidarities, these historical solidarities, and it acknowledges the deaths and memorializes the deaths of Los Seis de Boulder, and also 3 other men, including Ricardo Falcon, who were killed in like sort of this time during the Chicano movement. So should I read? I'm gonna read the description. I should put it on the website, because you're pulling from the website. I'm like, damn, we need to put everything on the website. So it starts with, we stand on indigenous land, and then it says, near this place on May 29th, 1974, Florencio Granado, Heriberto Terran, and Francisco Doherty were killed by a car bomb, and Antonio Alcantar was injured. 48 hours before, at Chautauqua Park on May 27th, 1974, Neva Romero, Reyes Martinez, and Yuna Jacola were killed by a car bomb. They stood in solidarity with the Black Student Alliance and other students of color fighting for access to education at CU Boulder. Viva Los Seis de Boulder, viva Florencio, viva Heriberto, viva Francisco, viva Neva, viva Reyes, viva Yuna, viva Ricardo Falcon, viva Luis Junior Martinez, viva Carlos Zapata, el movimiento sigue. So it's just, yeah, it's, you know, it's a lot of content. So if, you know, someone who's not familiar with this history cares to unpack it as they walk by it, there will be these layers, and also just this invocation that this work continues, and this is not something just of the past.
That's beautiful. In terms of just like, I know you said the second piece was a little more because of COVID and stuff. There were less of you, and you figured out a way to kind of throw it all into motion. But within both the pieces, or maybe more so with the first, how did you, when it came to that community engagement and like getting so many hands on deck and so many people involved, what was that process kind of like? Did you put out like a call? Were you like, you know, this is a story and more people need to hear it, who's interested in like yelling about it, basically, like it needs to be out there?
Yeah, we created a flyer. We created an event on Facebook. At this point, we had already created like foundational relationships with some of the family members. But at the end of the day, it was word of mouth, right? Of other people like, hey, I'm gonna go work on the art project that's happening for Los Seis. Do you want to come? Yeah, cool. Let me go. Or, oh, I've never heard of it. Let me step in. Because I think I'm a big believer, that when you call the community to help, the community will help. If that's something that they believe in, if it's something that they value. And I think that was the very important part about having the community being engaged in creating the art piece itself, is the art piece doesn't belong to one person. The sculpture belongs to everyone. And so, that was definitely something that like we did some of the foundational pieces, but it wasn't like we were trying to call and be like, hey, just have someone come help me, because nobody would show up. Everybody showed up. Every time we had community days, the room was packed. And it was exciting as an undergrad student in the art department, never seeing a lot of people who look like me in a classroom, let alone like making art. Like that was exciting for me. To disrupt those spaces, which I think is very important, to like disrupt those spaces as well.
Do you think most people that volunteer or participated, did you have like that people from diverse backgrounds? Like, did you see like a multiple population just trying to like contribute to this and like taking interest in the Chicano movement? And in this story, or do you think it was like mostly like people that associated with the victims that participated?
No, I think it was like a big, big range of people on different backgrounds, of different experiences, and age as well. There was, we had little kids coming in and helping us to like make some of the like molds, or like make some of the art pieces with molds. We had people who, like I mentioned, were a part of like of the campus during the time of like, the Colorado Chicano movement. We also had like various like people from different areas on campus, like people who probably would have never engaged or walked into that art building coming in to like work on stuff on the piece itself and being called to it because of the story of Los Seis. I don't know, Jasmine, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, no, I think everything you said resounds, except I will say with the first sculpture, I don't know if you were paranoid, but I was paranoid and I didn't let us put it on Facebook. And I went like, we made the flyer and people were like, can I post this on my door? And I was like, no, mailboxes only. So like we were word of mouth, but we were like connecting directly with people. So in some ways that wasn't necessarily super inclusive, right? Like you kind of had to know somebody who was going to invite you, but it also kept the project safe because it was very tenuous, especially with the first sculpture. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what would happen if like, it was just like more public knowledge that we were working on something this large scale. I think like, we did go for the temporary authorization, but before that, we were trying to get a permanent installation, right? Like that was the point from the beginning. So we were sort of like flying over under the radar. So I was like pretty freaked out. So it was word of mouth. It was amazing. Those, especially the first sculpture project, right? Like, yeah, those were really special days. And that room, those ceramics room, which you've taken classes in, and I have taught classes in as an instructor, they never felt more alive, right? Those rooms than when we were using them on those Saturdays. So anyway, it was a special time.
That's so cool. I mean, it's almost more special in a way that it did in some ways stay kind of like underground and word of mouth and like someone who knew of something and it just how that trickles down. And then you actually see how many people do come together at the end. And that's so astounding. So that's really awesome. I think that probably wraps up any questions I specifically have about that project. Jasmine, I do have a question for you just in your work in general. I was looking on your website and just how you really merge all these realms of kind of the expression, like there's the video portion and the performance and the ritual and the expressive and all of this. And like, I'm just curious as a kind of, this is a very loaded question, very vague, but like, where does that inspiration to be so holistic in that way kind of come from? When you like merge all these forms of expression together, and then kind of also in relation to this project, when you bring in the actual very public realm in, how that also characterizes that.
Yeah, that's a large question.
Like.
That's a nice assessment of my work. Thank you. Well, I've been starting to think, now that I've had some reflection period about like the sculpture project, and right, like it's really important what Celina said, like it's not mine in any sense. I'm like honored to have been the facilitator, but I hesitate to lean too much into like my authorship, and at the same time I also know there are ways that I have like informed the piece through my subjectivities. So what do I want to say? I mean, I think of that like, so all of those different interests I think converge with this piece, and the intention of shifting a space and of acknowledging history and dwelling in history, and creating something that stands and interrupts. And so something that I have been like very interested in is these artifacts, these incantation bowls, which are like from the 8th century. They are old. They are, you know, I will not take the time to actually contextualize them properly, but they were these objects that were likely placed under homes to protect them. So sometimes I think about I think about Los Seis de Boulder like as protectors, as people who like left their mark and left their work, right? And so I also I think about these bowls were overturned and sort of put down like this. So I also think about this sculpture as this like protector, or this piece of acknowledgement. So I don't know, maybe that sort of starts to engage with your question, but the sculpture, while not mine, is, you know, I think ways that I've thought about it, they're meaningful for me, at least in how I think about the work and look at the work that we all did together.
Awesome. Yes. Very inspiring. Inez, do you have any more questions or any?
No, only one thing comes up to mind, and this is probably coming from me and my own practice, but I've realized a lot, like in projects where you need the collaboration of so many people to achieve something so big and to just like be properly informed. And it's so beautiful to see the community come together and work on it together. But as you said, you see yourself as somehow a facilitator of this project, and all of you, in a sense, were members creating this. As an artist, was it hard for you, or was it a change in dynamic for you to facilitate something rather than be hands-on yourself? Because I find myself sometimes with my projects, I'm like very controlling, and it's hard for me to let someone touch a project or like be part of a project that I'm doing just because I have this image of the final result. How do you think that, was that a big switch for you, or were you already used to facilitating projects and working in bigger groups? Or do you think just for this project, there was an exception where you were just able to hand that off?
Yeah, I think this project was pretty exceptional. I think I actually, and I'm like curious what Celina thinks, but I feel like I had trouble taking control. Like I think I learned throughout the project, like, oh, okay, like actually, like, you know, anything that looks amazing, that is the strength of the group, and then anything that is poorly executed, that's 100% me. So like I'm gonna have to figure out how, well, no, but like, yes, like that's how I treated it in my head, right? So there were times, I think, I don't know, Celina, I want to say I got like bossier towards the end. Like I was like, well, that tile, you know, and I learned more, right? Like, because my experience tiling was next to nothing, right? So as I was like learning the craft and seeing what was happening, I think I got a little bit more definitive with like how things should go. And then also it was like, you know, I should not take too much credit for like the faces, for example. My friend Phoebe Scott like flew in to like rescue the faces, because like I can't make a face. Anyway, like, you know, so I did have to do a ton of outsourcing because I was fully out of my element. Outsourcing is the wrong word, right? Like collaboration. But, you know, I guess having Phoebe fly in, that was outsourcing. It was like the best. Phoebe came and just whipped it into shape. But like, so to answer your question, kind of, but it was more complicated than that. Celina, what do you think?
I feel like, to answer the question, you know, because it was very like community like engaged and stuff, like at the end of the day, we were the ones who, on the days we didn't have community, right, we were the ones that were piecing the things together. And the beautiful thing about having a mosaic portrait is that it allows for those quote unquote imperfections, right, where like that's needed to create that portrait. And as far as you getting bossy, like, no. I think it was more of like, we were very much like, let's just do it. I think for me, as like the work that I do, I did want to take a little bit more control. But I also had experience working and doing art workshops with like Akita and working with, you know, like Chicanx youth, and just letting them get messy and just being like, well, you're creating the art that you're creating. And so I think that that was important to like let the community have a big drive in it, and we were just there to make sure that at the end of the day the faces look like faces. So yeah, and big shout out to Phoebe as well, to Lupe as well, who helped with more of like the technical side of like making sure everything was proportional. But yeah,
Free, and then
Free.
Carlos. We could have like a we have a long list somewhere.
Yeah, long list of all the people who would consistently come and help. But yeah.
I love that. I think that's so inspiring that even as like two of the main, maybe facilitators or people who are kind of in that planning process, you both also acknowledge like, there's certain things that we're doing that I'm not like innate or good at, whether it's faces or whether it's whatever. So to really whether it's outsourced or whether it's, just surrender to the collaboration of it, I think that's so inspiring just to really just see where it goes with all of the energies that are just swirling around in there. So
yeah, we're lucky it worked out. Like whenever I was like, I don't know what's going to happen, I was like, well, we can't mess this up. Like, that was, I don't know. So yes, it was cool, but it also felt like some days I was like, is this really the time to learn how to tile? Like,
yeah, totally. You're like, this is an important work we're doing, an important story that we're trying to all center around. So I can understand that would be stressful.
Yeah, but we got the help we needed. We did it.
Yes, and it did turn out lovely. And I'm excited for the second one so it'll be at BMOCA like coming up soonish for a year, you said?
Yes, I'll send you all the information as soon as I have it.
Sweet.
I will go check that out absolutely as soon as it's on display.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's all I have. Unless you guys have anything else you'd like to share.
I think we're good. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Really.
Thank you so much for chatting with us. It was lovely, and really just your sculpture, like just having that and that visual for people that don't know about the story, or even me who I haven't seen it in person, but I've lived in Boulder for a year now, and I don't study at CU, but just reading about it, it also raised some anger in me. And also, as somehow an immigrant moving here from Spain at a later age, it's just like, it feels so unfair that these things can happen. So it's so important what you guys did and what you're still doing and the awareness that you're bringing to that. And the visuals, I find, since old history, like in churches and everything, visuals are so helpful to communicate things. Like people don't realize how important art and being able to visualize something on top of reading, on top of it, the awareness that it brings and what it communicates. So thank you so much for chatting with us, and thank you so much for the work that you guys have done.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Celina. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.